The most effective online courses are designed by instructional designers and SMEs who are on the same page. When these two parties both feel that they have an equal voice in the conversation and a partnership is established, the best possible learning experience is achieved. It is worth emphasizing the use of the word equal. If you are successfully establishing boundaries and guidelines, then the project is going to run smoothly. Having tension in the project because of a SME or the faculty member being disengaged or not believing that an online course could be an effective teaching method, well, that's going to lead to chaos. While most instructional design courses will teach about designing curricula, utilizing theories, and applying concepts, the topic of collaborating with SMEs doesn't receive as much attention. That's why I've teamed up with EduFlow and we're making a new course called Collaborating and Building Relationships with Subject Matter Experts, or as I've been calling them all along, SMEs. Sign up today to get notified when the course launches by going to eduflow.com/academy or simply click on the link in the show notes below. Now, let's get this podcast episode started. Hey folks, and welcome on in to the nerdiest podcast episode you're going to hear today. My name is Dr. Luke Hobson. I'm a senior instructional designer and program manager at MIT, and I'm the author of the book to help you make the transition into the instructional design field called What I Wish I Knew Before Becoming an Instructional Designer. My purpose, my passion is to help you make the online learning experience incredible for you and for your students. And you can find my book, courses, YouTube videos, podcast episodes, and more over at drlukehobson.com. It's no secret that I've been talking to many of you about how to transition into an instructional design position. It's honestly the highlight of my week when I get that email that says, Luke, I got the job. And then I jump up and down in my chair and I do a fist pump because I'm so excited that you're going to become a part of the instructional design family. While I've been having many of these conversations with you, I have also been talking to veteran and senior instructional designers who've lost their way. They don't have the spark they once had, and they're looking to rekindle those flames. So, how does someone find the meaning in their work when they just don't feel it anymore? Somehow, while I was thinking about how to address this topic, the stars aligned when Pugh and I were recently chatting about what his podcast topic could be. He mentioned during our conversation before the show that he used to be in the same boat, but now he feels fulfilled again as an instructional designer. I asked him to share his journey of how he found this meaning in his work, and that is what you're going to hear about today. This information is crucial for you new instructional designers too, because as an ID, you need to think about it. It's still a job. I love what I do, don't get me wrong. At the end of the day, though, it is still work. And if you are starting to get burned out, you need to recognize the warning signs and see the red flags and figure out your next steps on what to do. And Ant does a fantastic job in this podcast episode of describing some of his past experiences and where you could potentially see this happening in your life too. You are also going to hear me fanboy out over the fact that, well, Ant Pugh is on the podcast. If you don't know who Ant is, he has had a YouTube channel for years and years about instructional design. And the first time I went onto YouTube and I typed in instructional design, his videos popped up. And I instantly felt a connection with him because to me, he was real, he was authentic, he was genuine. He was telling me the truth about instructional design, and I will forever be grateful for stumbling upon his videos years and years ago. So it's a bit of a surreal feeling to now have him on the podcast, and I can't encourage you enough to sign up for his daily newsletter once we're done with this episode. He's pivoted away for a bit from YouTube, and now he's really focusing on trying to help others with this newsletter for instructional design, the L&D community, and is trying to think more about the motivation, some of his life lessons, his tips. I signed up for it a couple of weeks ago. It's awesome, so I would highly encourage you to also sign up for it, and Ant is going to definitely tell us all about it later on in this episode. So, folks, I'm not going to take up any more time. Here is the one and only Ant Pugh. Ant, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Luke. Nice to see you.
You too. I cannot wait to talk about this. And I'm going to do my very best to not fanboy out over here since I have known you literally for years and years on the internet. And now this is our second time actually chatting. So this is really cool to see this finally come full circle of the very first time I watched one of your YouTube videos. And now it feels like I'm literally interacting with you on this YouTube video, but we're doing it via podcast. So this is really neat. So I am so looking forward to this conversation and going into everything tonight. But for the folks at home who have never heard of you before somehow, can you please just introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us a little bit more about who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, thanks for the cool intro, Luke. I'm a British 40 something year old living in a city called Newcastle. It's about 2 hours north of Sydney in New South Wales, Australia. I've been in learning development for kind of 20 plus years. Started off as a trainer, moved into a variety of different instructional design, learning design roles. Always with a kind of design focus. That was always my kind of bread and butter, was the kind of graphic, visual, UX, UI design side of things. That was really my passion kind of growing up. Um, Tried to explore going into kind of training management and managing learning departments, but got quite frustrated in the corporate world. And in 2014, I think it was, I kind of threw my toys out the pram, quit my job, and said, right, I'm going to go and change the world and do it all properly by becoming a freelancer. Only to kind of find quite quickly that doing that type of work freelance was exactly the same as doing it in the corporate world. It was still quite frustrating. Lots of companies wanting kind of check the box e-learning. Lots of clients quibbling over pricing, all that kind of stuff. And then I guess 2-3 years ago, it really kind of found my groove, I guess, and I guess pulled up my big boy pants is what I kind of say, and kind of took a bit more responsibility really, and stopped thinking so much about the solutions that I was creating and being so kind of wrapped up in the outputs of what I was creating, and started really focusing on the needs of the clients that I was working for, and trying to think, well, what is it that they're trying to achieve, and not just taking their kind of requests for a 20-minute e-learning module on face value. And just really started to dig into how I could create um, learning or training, I should probably say, that actually was going to have an impact in people's lives. I felt like up until that point, I'd created a lot of content, a lot of what I thought was very, functional, well designed content, but it wasn't really having much of an impact on people's lives. And it was at that point in time where I kind of was. I mean, I've had this thought many times in my career, but I was questioning whether learning development was the path for me. I was thinking about, well, I quite enjoy marketing my freelance business. Maybe I could get into marketing. I quite enjoy teaching. Maybe I could become a teacher. And there were all these different ideas bubbling under the surface, but it was all caused by the fact that I didn't really feel truly fulfilled by working in learning development, and that was up until about 2 or 3 years ago. And then, as I said, I started focusing on performance, and I think the trigger for me was reading Map It by Cathy Moore, and really figuring out realizing that there were people out there who had figured out a way to focus on performance versus just creating content. And that was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. And now, long-winded way of answering your question, but I'm now a consultant working with clients, trying to create learning experiences, and trying to create learning that actually, or I keep saying learning, I should say training, trying to create training that actually is going to have an impact on the world. And so, at the same time as that, I've been very passionate about sharing my journey, sharing what I'm learning, via YouTube, via my email list, in all these different places as well. So that's kind of me.
Awesome. Fantastic. And I'm going to unpack that for a lot of different things you said. I want to ask more.
That was the most long-winded intro. You didn't ask me any of that, so I apologize. But I've set you up nicely, right?
I mean, I asked for you to be able to talk about yourself so that people know who you are. And you've had a long career within training and development, instructional design, and whatnot. So it makes a lot of sense that you have a lot to say for everything that you've done. So You know what? It makes plenty of sense to me. But what you were talking about, though, and what I wanted to highlight, which is something that we haven't talked on the podcast about. However, behind the scenes, I've been having a lot of conversations more with folks who are veteran IDs, and they are just feeling burned out. And as you mentioned, talking about trying to find that meaning in your work, and that's currently lacking. They're feeling stuck. They're not motivated. They thought it was going to be something else compared to what it really is. So that's what's going to be nice about this episode is that while I feel that our field is awesome, it's booming, there's a lot of different opportunities. At the same time, at the end of the day, it is a job. It's a career. And just like with anything else, you need to be able to look for pitfalls and what to avoid and how to adapt and change if things aren't really going your way. So whether you're a veteran listening to this podcast or for a person who is new trying to transition over into the field, at least this is a heads up, if you will, about potentially what you might face and how to actually overcome those different things. But before we get into anything of that sort, I want to know more about your journey. So take me back here because you've been in instructional design for a while. When was the first time you heard about this field? What was your perspective on it? Like, how did you find instructional design?
I think whenever I hear this question, I always hear people sort of almost apologetically saying, "Well, I'm not a typical example because I came in through the back door." But I feel like most people come in through the back door, i.e., you don't come out of school at 17, 18 years old and think, I'm going to go to university and learn how to become an instructional designer, do a degree or whatever, and then get a job as an instructional designer. I think most of us start as that we build up some expertise in something at our job, and we realize that other people need to learn what we know about, so we start teaching it, and then we start realizing that we can't teach everybody, so we maybe find some kind of e-learning software and start building courses and start becoming an instructional designer through that path. But for me, I started I graduated, so my background was design, so I did a design degree. I was always very focused on like the visual design, as I said before, like the UX, how things work, how things look. That was um, really kind of my bread and butter, I guess. But when I graduated, so this was at like the age of kind of, well, 20 years ago now. So I was sort of 21, 22 years old. I all the jobs that were design related, I actually took one. I was designing kind of, when you're in hospital and you're sitting in bed and you've got all those things attached to the wall behind you that are connected to your medical equipment. So you've got like the oxygen line coming in, and you've got all the plugs and things that attach to your bed so your bed moves. I was designing the layouts for those panels that go in hospital walls, and it was the most boring, soul destroying work you could imagine. It was literally like, right, move the plug 3 centimeters to the left, or move the oxygen input 3 centimeters to the right. And I was like, I thought I was going to be designing the next Lamborghini when I graduated. I thought it was going to be all this beautiful design stuff. But it turned in. I realized quickly that the bulk of design jobs were not as glamorous as I'd kind of hoped. And I was slumped in a chair 8 hours a day, staring at a computer screen, really no interaction with people. And I got off. I through a friend, actually, a friend hooked me up with a company who was doing. They were teaching technology within big electronic stores. So you would go into an electronic store and show people, how to use a digital camera. So they might have a contract with a digital camera company or a new printer company, and you'd go in and you would demo the equipment. So I started working for this company just on the weekends, actually, just doing this kind of demo work. And I started enjoying that kind of teaching element. And then this company that I worked for had an opportunity to run technology-based workshops on board cruise ships. I was, 23 years old, I think. I was like, wow, go and live on a cruise ship. That was like, that sounds far better than what I was doing in the week. So I did that for a few years, and that was incredible. I got to travel the world, but that really ignited a passion for teaching in me. So I was standing in front of rooms full of people, teaching different subjects, things like how to remove red eye from your photos, and how to build a photo slideshow with all your holiday photos, and how to use eBay safely. Stuff that, if you think about cruise ships, the demographic of people on the cruise ship is usually a little bit older. So the demographic of people I was teaching were a little bit less technically minded than me, so I was able to teach these subjects, come up with all these different ideas for subjects. So that really ignited the passion in me for teaching, because I quickly realized that I had to learn how to talk in plain English. I was explaining to people, open Internet Explorer and let's get started, and people wouldn't have a clue. So you'd have to talk them through step by step. And so I did that for a few years. I did a lot of kind of presentation design. Started putting the workshops onto DVD in the first place. So I record using Camtasia. I would record the workshop in my cabin on the cruise ship at the time, and I would speak into my little microphone and record them so that people could take the workshop away on DVD, so that when they got home they wouldn't forget everything that I taught them. And that was kind of my first foray into e-learning. And then when I kind of got sick of living in a 4x4 cabin, traveling the world. We sound glamorous, but we actually, when you do it for months and months on end, it got a bit claustrophobic in the end. And I started looking for a real job. I started looking for, e-learning jobs. And this is where I kind of stumbled into the field. I was like, oh, okay, there is a field called e-learning. And it was all based, I think at the time it was Articulate. I've forgotten the name of the software. It was before Storyline came out. So Presenter, I think it was called. And there was all these different kind of tools, really quite basic tools for creating click and read e-learning. But I kind of got into it that way, and took a couple of jobs doing that, and kind of, figured it all out myself really. And I didn't have any real kind of mentoring. I didn't do any kind of qualification or certification. So it was all just figuring it out on the job. And so, yeah, I did come in through the back door, in inverted commas. But I think that's probably how most people enter the field, really. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of how I got into it.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you were basically doing both as far as for the back end work, as well as you were the person who was in front of the audience, being the one to lead the workshop, do the training, talk to learners essentially, like in real time about things. Because there's a lot of instructional design jobs out there that you never do that. You're always behind the scenes. You're just the person behind the screen, and you're not out there. And that's actually really fascinating to hear that your first job had you doing public speaking and this type of real life training, and then trying to record yourself too on top of that, which I would imagine as a 20-year-old would be probably kind of nerve wracking. So that is actually really interesting to hear. That was the first thing that you were exposed to.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I was recording myself, I wasn't actually on the camera, so it was just my voice. So
Ah,
that actually to me wasn't that nerve wracking. And my dad's always been in kind of amateur dramatics growing up, so he always used to rope me into doing pantomimes. As I used to do like the play like the kids in pantomimes and stuff. So I've always had a bit of a kind of theatrical kind of, or a thespian streak, I guess. So the whole standing up in front of an audience, I love that. I love teaching, and once I started teaching, I realized I kind of found my calling, to an extent, I guess. And I really enjoyed that process of understanding a concept deeply, and then being able to articulate it in a way that people understand. And I remember, I specifically remember moments when I was teaching where I would see, when you're standing in front of a room. I'm sure you've done this before, but when you're standing in front of a room teaching, you can see in people's eyes when they understand something, and when they have those light bulb moments. And as an instructional designer, you don't get that very often anyway. But that's magical, that moment when you see the penny drop and people are like, oh wow, something that's been kind of alien to me for maybe a decade or longer, I now understand it because you've explained it in a slightly different way, or you've used an analogy or something. Something has helped me understand that. And that feeling I found was absolutely magical. And then through getting, through going through that journey of being a classroom trainer and getting to the end of it and kind of thinking, oh, I still want to do design. That was really my passion, but I love this teaching thing as well. When I stumbled into e-learning, I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is design and it's teaching kind of combined. It's like, this is what I've been waiting for. But it took me so long to kind of line those two things up, because when I first got there, I was like, wow, this is it. I feel confident as a trainer. I feel confident as a designer. I now have everything I need to succeed in this career. But it took me another 10 years from there to actually figure it out, which is crazy when I look back at it. But and that's really my mission now. Is I'm sure yours is very similar, whereby I just want to reduce the amount of time it takes for people to get from, okay, I understand the basics of instructional design now. How do I actually build a meaningful career, that took me far too long. And I think we can really reduce the amount of time it takes people to do that. So yeah, if we can achieve that with these types of conversations, I'm all for it.
Absolutely. That is always the goal too, which is always something that is so. We even did a webinar today, and we were talking about how if you, as somebody who is a learner who has extra time, who is dedicated to doing something for 20 hours on the weekend, why on earth would you put up a barrier to stop them from progressing? Which always drives me nuts. But some of these courses are like, no, there's like cadence. You must follow this pace. Like, we are afraid that you're going to get too lost. And I'm like, no, they have time. As an adult, you know how hard it is to capture someone's real time and they want to do something? Like, no, don't stop them. So anyway, minor tangent there. But as what you just said, I was like, yeah, I talked about that today, actually, in a webinar. It's just, it just drives me nuts that we still have that issue, especially higher ed. As someone has a higher ed background, it's like one of the things that drives me insane about our field. But anyway, I digress. So after the honeymoon stage was over, you've gone through, you're starting to find yourself, you're realizing that things can actually be so great. But then it comes the final point where you're like, something's not right. There has to be more to this. What was it that finally got you thinking, like, beyond that 9 to 5 typical day to day, that really made you want to start looking even further ahead to see like where you could find more meaning in your work itself?
Yeah, so I spent a long time, when I first got into e-learning, I kind of spent a long time, as I think 99% of people do, thinking about the solution. So I was like, right, I've got to learn all these tools. I've got to, you know, my expectation when I entered into this field of e-learning was that everyone had it already figured out, right? These companies who had these big kind of rapid authoring software, I assumed that they had it all figured out, and you just needed to use this software, and um, you could create content that was going to solve real business problems. I never ever for one second questioned that um, that wasn't the case, right? So I spent 2, 3, 4 years playing around with tools, mastering different types of software, experimenting with my projects. At that point in time, I was working, internally at companies, so I was like an employee, trying these things out, sending out courses, measuring it by how many people had completed the course, all this kind of stuff. Which, when I look back on now, it wasn't. I'd never learned any. I'd never been told anything otherwise, right? So this was, I was good at designing slides. I was good at designing videos. I understood how to, break down content so it was easy to digest. All that kind of stuff. I understood the kind of theory of how to create content, but when I look back, it was more how to create kind of presentations or knowledge sharing. It was never really focused on performance. And I think it was this assumption that the industry, in inverted commas, had it all figured out, and everyone was already doing it the right way. So all I had to do was just learn what everybody else was doing, and I would be able to succeed. That was my expectation for many years. But I always had this nagging doubt that, and I think if I link it back to that conversation we just had about, seeing that light bulb moment when I was standing in front of a room full of people, I never felt that, and I think to begin with, as an instructional designer, I thought, oh, that's just because I don't get to sit, next to them when they're doing the training. I'm sure they're having those light bulb moments, and I'm sure that's having, the desired effect on what I'm trying to create and the business, but I'm just not seeing it. So I thought, well, maybe that's just an unfortunate, aspect of being an instructional designer, is that you don't get to see those magical moments. But as I kind of progressed on and on through my career, I think I got to a point where I was like, you know what? I'm not really highly valued in the business I'm working in. I'm not, I'm not getting huge clamor for more and more of these courses. Some of my, requests, I've got all these training requests coming in for new courses. My requests for another instructional designer to support me, for example, were being, queried, because they're basically saying, well, where's the business case for us hiring another person? You're doing this by yourself. That's enough. And I really started to question, well, where is the value here? Like, and I guess this all came about as well as I got a bit more emotionally mature, and I started to think about business as a whole, and started thinking about, why are we doing things in the first place? I specifically remember a conversation with the training manager at the company I was working for, and I actually said to him at the time, I said, I think I was going through a bit of a negative phase, and I said, what would actually happen if this training department didn't exist? And he quite flippantly turned around and said, absolutely nothing. This company would carry on as it stands. Nothing would be any different. uh, what he didn't say, which was on my mind, was, well, actually, the company would be better off because they wouldn't be paying both of our salaries and these other people who are doing the training. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. I don't want to, I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing something that it kind of felt like we're getting away with it. It felt like, oh, well done. We're doing a job that actually has no meaning. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, there's got to be more to life than this. And I thought that was because this was just what it's like in the corporate world. I was just like, it's just broken. And that's pretty much about the time I kind of quit my job and said, right, if I go freelance, I can work on projects with clients who have kind of better intentions and want to do things the right way. But looking back at the time, I didn't really know what the right way was. I just thought I was restricted by the infrastructure that I was working with. So I've kind of gone off on a tangent there. But going back to your what was your original question? Sorry, I've lost track a little bit there.
I was just basically asking you what made you think beyond the typical 9 to 5 of like, there has to be more. Like, what was it that was like, there has to be more out there besides what I'm currently doing?
Yeah, well, I think these types of conversations I was having were frustrating me, and I think after the initial excitement of getting into a new field, getting a job as an e-learning designer, learning these rapid authoring tools, creating my first course, that was a big moment. I was like, wow, my first course that people are actually taking. I was like, that's so cool. But there was that kind of that little voice in my head nagging away saying, you're just creating crap here. You're putting this content out, it's not helping people do anything, it's not actually changing people's lives. It was actually even worse than when I was on the cruise ships teaching, because at least the stuff I was teaching on the cruise ships, people were like, okay, now I know how to use eBay safely. Now I can go home and I can build my family tree on the internet because you show me the techniques. Like, that was more satisfying because I was like, that's tangible, like that's actually changing somebody's life. The stuff I was creating, these kind of compliancy type courses and this stuff, it was just content that I was putting out there. And you know I was creating these interactive e-learning courses, and I was thinking, this could just be a video. Like, somebody's clicking next and clicking on drag, doing drag and drops, and it's not actually, why don't we just make a little video and they can just watch it? It's exactly the same. And I, for me, like, freelancing didn't solve it. I had a lot of clients. My first couple of years freelancing were very successful because I had a lot of clients asking me for courses. Can you build this? Can you build that? And I think because I was relatively confident at the visual design side, my portfolio looked great, and clients would come along and think, wow, this looks good. And so I made a lot of money in the first couple of years of freelancing, just building courses. But it was the same problem. It was like, these solutions are not actually changing the world. They're not making this client's business any better. And I kind of hoped that the client would realize that, but the clients kept coming, and I see so many businesses out there who are making decent money. They're doing, really great business. They have big teams creating all this content, but that's all they're doing is creating content. They're not actually creating anything that's going to kind of change the world. I call it training that matters, right? Training that actually has goes beyond just being kind of pretty and functional. It actually does something in the world. So yeah, for me it was a real journey, and it took me a long time to figure it all out, and I think I still am figuring it out right now. So I definitely don't feel like I'm the finished product, but I definitely hit upon a point a few years ago where the questioning disappeared and the constant little voice in my head stopped nattering, saying, what are you doing here? You're not contributing to the world. Because I finally felt like, okay, now I've got processes that I can follow. I can, I know how to create I know how to create solutions that are actually going to impact the world in a positive way. And I think it took a lot of, for me, it took a lot of courage to kind of shed the identity that I was carrying. So it was letting go of my ego, thinking Ant is a designer. He creates these beautiful courses or beautiful modules. It was letting go of that, and that was scary because it's like, well, what else is there? If I am a designer, that's how I saw myself, as a designer. And so if I'm not a designer, what am I? Am I going to be just facilitating meetings and interviewing SMEs and overseeing workshops and guiding clients through processes, to me that all felt quite like, well, in the first instance it was like boring. I was like, oh god, I don't really want to do that. I like sitting in my echo chamber, just doing my, doing my design. And it was a big kind of growing up period. But I realized, if I don't do this, I'm never going to be satisfied. I'm never going to feel fulfilled within my career. And so it was a step that I had to take. So I think it was a couple of things, combined. It was discovering tools like action mapping, performance consulting, needs analysis, and starting to try it out with real life projects, because it's all very well discovering these concepts, but then you've got to try them out, and they're not easy to just get straight away. And then you've also got to find clients or projects where they're open to trying something different. If you ask a typical client, if a client comes to me and says, "Can you build me a 20-minute e-learning module?" It takes a lot of skill to talk them out of that and suggest an alternative solution that is going to help their business better than a 20-minute e-learning module. But a lot of people haven't. And I spoke to a client a couple of weeks ago who they just weren't open to that. They wanted their e-learning module because that's what they'd promised their manager, and so unless they delivered that, they were not going to be able to get a pat on the back. And so I can't work with those clients anymore because I just physically can't do it. It's something about it
Sure.
that
Yeah.
yeah.
So I have to ask then, from everything that you were just talking about, is that you found a passion in teaching, being in front of a classroom, so to speak, and doing all that. But then you went into freelance. Was there ever a question about trying to get into education at all? Because for a lot of the folks in the field, it's like you're either corporate or you're higher ed. And then there's also, of course, other different entities in there, but it seems like it's always like one of the two. But you went one from corporate to freelance, which I find kind of interesting, that there wasn't an educational path for you in there somewhere.
So when you talk about an educational path, how exactly do you mean? I don't quite follow.
So, I mean, either like you go into teaching as a profession, if you enjoyed the teaching part
Right.
of being in front of a classroom, why didn't you try to look into becoming an instructor of instructional design, or something related to a higher education path?
Well, I definitely didn't feel qualified to become an instructor of instructional design, because I just didn't feel like I had it like nailed down. And I think also I've always had a very entrepreneurial kind of mindset. It combined with that mentality that I told you about, where my manager was kind of very dismissive of the value of training within the company I was working at. I was also very frustrated by the restrictive nature of corporate life. So I was working in an environment where people would race into the office. This was in London, when I was living in London. People would race into the office for sort of 7:30 in the morning just to be there before the manager got in there, and then they would hang around until the manager had gone home, just to say, look, I'm working late. And it would drive me nuts. I'd be like, well, what are you actually contributing to the business? That's more important than how many hours you're sitting at your desk. And I just found, I think this is definitely a product of the environment I was in, and the company I worked for. But having spoken to people as well, I think this does happen in corporate world a lot anyway. But there's this expectation, probably less so now. Everyone's remote, or there's more remote work, because I think now people are working remotely. You can't get away with just being online 24/7. You have to start delivering results. And I actually think, in a kind of weird kind of way, COVID will have a positive impact on our field, because
Oh, sure. Yes.
companies are going to start thinking, well, what are we actually spending our money on? When COVID hit, a lot of companies cancelled their training budgets, siloed their training teams. And I think a lot of companies started thinking, well, what are we actually getting for our money here? We're getting all this content and we're getting all this training, but what's it actually doing to the bottom line of our business? And so, so I think the question was about how I decided to go freelance. I think I knew that there was more out there for me. I knew that there was more opportunity out there. I knew that I had the determination and the work ethic to give it a go. And you know what? When you start freelancing, worst case scenario, you have to give up and go and get a job again. That was my mentality. I was fed up anyway. I wasn't enjoying my work. I was, working for this company that didn't value what I was doing. I wasn't getting paid particularly well. And so I decided, I tried freelancing for 18 months and it doesn't work. I can always get another job. There's absolutely no problem. And in fact, I did apply for a couple of jobs and got offered at least one, I think, before I opted to go freelance. So it was almost like validation that I could get a job if I wanted. So let's give it a go. I'll always, it was my wife at the time, actually. I'd been talking about freelancing for years. Sorry, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. My girlfriend at the time said, "Can you just stop talking about this and give it a go?" Because she's got to the point where she was frustrated with listening to me talking about, "Oh, I'm going to go and freelance and change the world." And she was like, "Just go and do it then." So yeah, she helped me kind of push me in the right direction.
We need those support systems. We don't talk about that enough. The support systems behind
Oh,
the scenes, what you don't see, they're they're tremendously helpful. Absolutely. At the end of the day, you mentioned a couple of times already about Cathy Moore's book, Map It. I feel like beyond just, I want to think about like for instructional design books, I would say that that book is definitely up there along with like Julie Dirkson's book, Design for How People Learn. I think are like the top two I keep seeing constantly on LinkedIn whenever someone is talking about a book. What was it about there that you learned from that book that taught you that like, hey, I can actually find meaning in my work? What was it that really drove that inspiration from that book?
I think I can sum it up in one sentence, and that was focusing on what people should be doing instead of focusing on what people should know. And that for me was a huge light bulb moment, because, and I think I've been talking about this on my, I write a daily email for learning designers, and I've been talking about this on my emails recently. But when you think about, like, I'm kind of, I'm going to do a bit of a workshopping with you now, Luke. So I'm thinking about this
Oh,
as that
okay.
one of my theories into why this is a problem is because when we think about, when we think about training and we think about why we're creating training, most people can articulate that we're creating training because we want something in the business to change. We want to improve performance. If you'd have asked me 10 years ago, why are you creating training? I would have been able to articulate that relatively well. It would have been, we want to see an improvement in performance of X, Y, or Z, right? However, when I approached that kind of logically, that how are we going to do that? Right. They need to know this information. And when they know this information, they'll be able to do this better. So we go down that path of, right, what do they need to know? So we put all the information into our e-learning course or our slideshows or whatever, our PowerPoint. And we say, right, this is the information they need to know. How can we best get them to remember that information? And that was the approach I took for a long time. And it's logical, right? Because for me to do something, for me to be able to, start up this podcast conversation with you today, Luke, I had to click on the link in the email and I had to click on a few buttons, set up my webcam, set up my microphone, all that stuff. I had to do these things, but before I could do them, I had to know how to do them. So I had to go through the process. The knowledge came first, right? I had to know first, and then I started doing it. So I think that's why a lot of training is designed like that, because we think you've got to know the information and then you can do something with it. But what I learned from Cathy Moore is that by starting on the outcome, starting with the end in mind, focusing on the performance and working backwards from there. Well, actually, even beyond that, you focus on the goal, right? You focus on what you're trying to achieve, and then you work backwards. What are the behaviors people need to be performing to achieve that goal? What's stopping them from performing those behaviors? Right, let's come up with solutions to overcome that. It flipped the model for me, and I think that the older I get, and the more hopefully wiser I get as I grow up, I'm seeing that in a lot of aspects of life is when you actually invert the problem and you completely flip things back to front, it it changes the paradigm and it gives you a new way of looking at things. And when I read that line, I think she says, focus on what people do rather than focus on what people know. I was like, oh my God, why didn't somebody tell me that 10 years ago? Because if I'd have known that, I would have just kind of had a completely different approach to what I was doing.
And I feel blessed that the first thing I learned about within instructional design was backward design, which is essentially something very similar to what you just said of starting with the goals, the learning outcomes, then working your way backwards towards talking about the objectives, to then talking about the assessments, to then talking about the activities and the content. And then that way you can see with transparency and the alignment of everything that you were designing, so that way you know where to improve, what to actually talk about, when, where, how, why, and things of that nature. So luckily for me, I was introduced to that early on. So I'm always this like, oh, we're talking about goals and outcomes. And then I hear differently where people are like, that's not how I was trained. Where I was like, oh, like if I didn't have that mentality, I wouldn't be the same designer. There's no way. Like it literally was the foundation, the building blocks as far as for how I design everything within the learning experience. If you remove that from me, then I'm facing an identity crisis here of what am I doing?
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally feel you.
So let's jump back in here because clearly, so you had this passion. Now you have found this new identity. You're talking about different types of tools and ways for you to be able to think about design that you never did before in your career. From that point, what ideas have you noticed that really resonated with those that you were training to make this type of training and development more engaging and more relevant for people?
So are you talking about with the clients, or sorry, I don't
The
quite get the
learner,
question.
the learners themselves, like the employees, like what did you actually design within the learning experience themselves to make people like to wow them, to impress them, to say like this isn't like any other training, this is specifically and super fantastic training that's actually really going to help me in the real world?
Yeah, well, I think this is part of the problem is that that was my mentality previous. It was like, I've always been a big fan of that kind of big reveal. Like I used to love Steve Jobs'
Mm.
iPhone presentations because it was like, he'd deliver this amazing presentation and drop this bombshell about what was happening, and it was be like, wow, this is awesome. I used to love, going to the movies and seeing like uh, that experience of having like that big reveal. I always thought I could carry that into e-learning, and I had this dream of, when I used to work in corporate, I'd be working away in my office, and I would be building this e-learning course. Nobody would know what was in there, and then I'd send it out, and everybody in the business would be like, "Wow, that was the best e-learning course I've ever built." And I think that's a really bad way of approaching training. And it took me a long time to kind of let go of the idea of that and start realizing that the best way you can design training is designing it with the learner, right? You sit next to them and you figure out what it is that they're struggling with, and you design solution, on the fly almost, and you get them to try it out, and they give you feedback, and you improve it and you tweak it and you go back to the drawing board, and you carry on building. And I think that kind of agile way of working, that iterative way of working, where you're kind of side by side, it didn't carry that kind of the way you just described it of creating this amazing learning experience. It didn't have that association, which I felt a little bit aggrieved at to begin with, but have realized subsequently that that's not what this is about. Our job is to try and help people do things better and achieve, for them to help the businesses that they work for do better things. And so I think that was again part of this letting go of my ego, and kind of shifting my identity a little bit from, I am the designer who, and this comes from a teaching perspective as well, right? We grow up with this student teacher mindset where we think the teacher knows all the answers, the student's just there to listen and to take all the information from the teacher. But it's shifting that paradigm a little bit and thinking more about how can you support them. And you don't have all the answers. Actually, they're the ones going to be providing you with the answers, right? You're just going to be kind of back and forth guiding them, creating the framework for them to improve and to be able to do their job properly. So yeah, it's to be a bit more specific, because your question was out, what kind of solutions are helping learners. Another book you haven't mentioned that I really recommend people read is How People Learn by Nick Shackleton-Jones. Really, really good book. Good book.
It's behind me on the bookshelf. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
But he talks about push and pull experiences. So if somebody's already really engaged in a topic and they want to learn, it's quite easy to create experiences. Create resources that they're going to use to help apply to their job to help them do something better. So an example. I've recently been setting up a life operating system. It's a really geeky system that manages all my projects and my to-dos. It manages my habits and my routines. It manages my personal knowledge management system. So all my highlights from my Kindle go in there, and everything's tagged together in this kind of super geeky framework. It's all built in Notion. I'm not sure. Are you familiar with Notion?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. But yeah, it's a really, really cool system that's kind of running my life now, and took a lot of work to get set up, but it's now really, really helpful. But during that process of learning, I was very excited about it. So I actually took 2 weeks off work to set it all up. I watched videos. I joined a community. I took a course. I did all these things because I was passionate about it. So I used all these different learning artifacts to get me to the place where I needed to be. That was fine because I was passionate about it, right? But when we're in a situation where we're not necessarily passionate, and I would imagine, I don't know what the breakdown is, but I would imagine in a lot of situations when we're trying to help people achieve something in their day-to-day job, they're maybe not passionate about learning it because it feels like something that, I'm working on a project at the moment where with a client where I'm trying to help them write better reports. So there's a department in a marketing department, and they should be writing these marketing reports, and they're not doing it to the desired quality. But there's no real motivation from the learners to do it properly because they don't see the value at the moment, so there's no motivation there. So in those types of examples, rather than focusing on the resources, creating the job aids and the videos and the cheat sheets and the things that that I was using to build my life operating system, I'm focusing on creating experiences. So scenarios and practice activities and case studies and things that are actually going to immerse people into the experience and really explain to them and help them understand why this stuff is important, right? It's not just a case of having a slide at the beginning of a presentation saying this is important because we're like, well, that's not really helping me. But actually giving them a situation where they've got to overcome a challenge, for example, and if they can successfully navigate that challenge, there are positive consequences, and those positive consequences align with their job and their work and the benefits that they have from doing a good job. And if they are unsuccessful in overcoming this challenge, the consequences are actually negative, and they can really relate to those negative consequences because maybe they've seen that in their job before, and they're like, well, yeah, that happens to me. That happened last year. I wrote this really bad report, and this consequence was that I didn't get a pay rise, or the agency I was working with wasn't happy, or the campaign didn't go very well. And if we can create these experiences where they're actually contextually relevant to that person's job, people are going to kind of connect the dots better, I think. So that's kind of what I've been doing, is kind of going down that path and learning about branching scenarios and storytelling and interactive stories and case studies. And I'm still early in this journey, right? And I feel like I've been in. You said at the start, you said, "Oh, you've been in L&D ages." I'm like, yeah, I have, but I feel like a newbie in some respects. I feel like I've been reborn in the last few years because my eyes are now open to these types of approaches, and I'm like, wow, like I've got to learn this stuff all over again now, and I've got to try it out on real life client projects where they're paying me and they're putting their trust in me to do a good job, and I'm the one saying, you don't need a 20-minute e-learning module, you need some experiences and some PDFs and some job aids and all this kind of stuff. And I'm kind of it's risky because it feels risky because I've got the weight on my shoulders. But having said that, it's very low risk because the alternative is that they get the 20-minute module, which is going to be completely ineffective anyway, and nothing's going to change in their business. So it's kind of a catch-22 really. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question in a roundabout way.
It actually does in a complete roundabout way, because that's what I was expecting you to say when I asked that question. It was me to talk more about scenario-based learning or project-based learning or gamification, simulations, case studies, peer-reviewed activities. You name it, there's 1,000 different things we can do, team-based activities and group work and blah, blah, blah. So that's what I was curious about, was like, in your new learning experiences and training experience that you are designing, like, what have you been really focusing on? Because sometimes for me, I am not the learner. That's my biggest thing that I've always thought about for my career, where it's just like, no, like I'm Luke, I'm an ID, I think about this over here, but you are a different person. You are an engineer. You are, somebody who I'm designing this for is for the target audience, and I'm not that person. So perhaps I already know about a subject, but to them, it might be something that's eye opening. I remember I talked before about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation in a leadership course. And I was taught about that a long time ago, honestly, in college. And for a lot of these folks, they're like, I have never heard of that before. I'm like, really? So after talking with them, I'm like, okay, so if I build a scenario around, Daniel Pink's work with extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, and I want you to practice it here, then I want you to go try it in the workforce, and then I want you to do a reflection and talk about it and share what you've learned. Like, what do you say? And to see people go through those motions and to find out at first where they're like, growth mindset, like what are we talking? Like, no, we're not talking about this stuff. And I'm like, listen, like I swear this can be really helpful if you try it. And sure enough, through the activities and through feedback and whatnot, we got it right. But that's what's always so mind blowing, is that you have one assumption, and you never should make assumptions within our field. But when you have like one natural assumption, and then you hear what the learners actually go through and what their main takeaways were, you're like, oh, never thought of it like that. And then now you have this brand new experience that is catered for them, not for you as the ID, but for the target audience.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I was talking about. And we got there. So, hey, we did that long conversation. But all right. So we're coming to an end here. And I definitely want to make sure that I ask you two more questions at least. So for the first, because this entire thing was actually, I thought about our topic from everything with meaningful learning experiences and finding training that you really do care about and everything else of the sort. What about for somebody who has lost their way as an instructional designer? They're burned out. They're not feeling it. They're kind of thinking about giving up or changing careers. What would you say to that person for advice on what they can do for real actionable steps?
Yeah, so I think to begin with, you've got to have the resilience and determination and patience to to realize that this is you're playing a long game here, right? Learning and development, I think, is a very immature industry, in as much as there's some amazing tools and there's some amazing people and there's some amazing theories and frameworks and all this kind of stuff. But I would say 99.9% of businesses out there are not, using some of the best practice way of doing things. And the mentality I think a lot of companies have is something is better than nothing, right? And therefore their mentality is, yeah, okay, we could probably be doing training a bit more effective and spend a bit more money and time on needs analysis and designing more kind of complex solutions and doing more of that upfront performance consulting thinking. But they almost think, well, we've always done it this way. It's not hurting anyone, this kind of training. People seem to we get some smile sheets back saying, yeah, we kind of enjoyed the course and that was fine. So there's no real motivation to change there. And as I said before, I think things like COVID actually kind of in a strange way helped, because I think if we got rid of 90% of training today and just focused on the 10% that's left over and put all of our energy into that 10%, cumulatively there would be a much bigger impact on the world and on businesses than if we just carry on spreading ourselves too thin. So from a practical perspective, this is difficult to hear because there's no easy answers, but I think the majority of businesses out there, they're going to be very difficult to change quickly. So as somebody working maybe in a company as a kind of instructional designer or learning designer, you might be freelance, you might be working internally, you might be higher ed, shifting the mentality of a whole business and their L&D, they're thinking around this is very, very difficult. So you have to start off small, take baby steps. If you're applying concepts like action mapping, it's about, just 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's about testing things out, seeing if you can just make a little bit of difference. Can you adjust your training request form so that it's no longer called a training request form, it's now called a development request form? Can you start having the conversations or building relationships maybe with stakeholders and SMEs to help them see that the 20-minute e-learning module that they've asked for isn't the right approach. And it's, can you improve your consulting skills to be able to have better conversations with these people and try things out? You try it with one person, it doesn't work. They stamp their feet and they say, we want 20 minutes of e-learning. Fine, I'm going to have to go away and build that. But where can you start making some subtle improvements? Because when you can start making some improvements, and when you do create that experience you talked about, Luke, the scenario or the learning experience that actually does have an impact, I think people will start recognizing that and seeing that within the business, and they're thinking, oh, I saw what you did over there, and we saw a measurable change in X, Y, and Z. And once you actually make a measurable difference to a business, you can start shouting about it, right? You can say, as a learning development team, we achieved X, Y, and Z this year. And it's not just delivery of X number of courses or X number of people took our courses. It's, we shifted a business metric. We sold more widgets, or we achieved something that's actually the business cares about. So I'd say being patient is really key, because this isn't going to happen overnight. Being I would say relentless is really important as well. So the word I use is resilient, but kind of there is a way to create effective training, right? There are ways to create training effectively. It's just that very, very few people are able to do it. So if the truth is out there, right, it's not a case of kind of closing your mind to it and thinking, well, I'll never be able to do that because this is just the way the business does it. It's about holding on to that glimmer of truth and the glimmer of hope, and never letting go and saying, right, I'm going to get there. It just might take some determination and resilience to get there. And the tricky thing is that I've found is that I'm 42 years old now. I've spent the last 15 years watching my friends and my peers and my family getting high paid jobs, flashy cars, nice houses, going on nice holidays, getting all promotions, all these things. Obviously they're all very kind of I'm not saying that that's what we should be aspiring to in life, right? I'm not saying that they're fulfilled, but it's very easy to look sideways and think, oh, maybe if I got into marketing or teaching or some other field, I could have all this stuff and I could achieve, I could be satisfied. But at the end of the day, you're in instructional design for a reason. You've obviously got something. You're listening to a podcast with two geeks talking about instructional design, right? You've got 52 minutes of the way through a podcast listening to two geeks talking about instructional design. You've obviously got a glimmer of passion there, enough for you to listen to 52 minutes of a podcast. There's something there. So you've got to cling on to that with both hands and trust that there is a bright future out there, because I believe there is an incredible future for learning and development. And whilst I believe that the industry is very immature, I see it a bit like a chrysalis, right? You've got your butterfly that's in your chrysalis waiting to explode. And that's how I see learning and development. There's so much opportunity. There's so many things to look forward to. But as an industry, we just haven't come out of our chrysalis yet. We haven't kind of been able to to fully kind of break free. And I think, if we can hold on tight, the future is extremely exciting. And it's just a case of constantly learning, constantly testing things out, and also being brave, being courageous in your decision making. If you're in a company where they're just determined to carry on cranking out 20-minute e-learning modules, and there's absolutely no appetite to measure the value of training, quit, get another job. You've only lived once. Don't sort of hang around and just do this because you feel like that's the way that's the way things are happening. That's what I did. And to be totally honest with you, I look back, I'm like, oh man, quitting my job to start freelancing then when I didn't really know how to create effective training was a bad idea in hindsight. But as I said to you before, I actually made more money creating kind of click and read crap than I did, doing things properly. So I guess my point being is don't kind of settle if you're feeling like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. So I've kind of contradicted myself there. I've said on one hand, be patient because things take time, and then on the other hand, I'm saying don't settle. You can always quit and find another opportunity. It's about seeing where you can make changes. So if you're in a situation where there are some opportunities to practice these different kind of concepts and these different types of ways of thinking, if there are opportunities, great, cling on to those and give them a go. You might still have to create the 20-minute e-learning module as well at the same time, but just use it, treat it as almost like the way I think about it sometimes is like almost like I'm doing a PhD. I treat the I treat my client projects like, great, I get 3 months to practice and, practice building a scenario, and I'm getting paid for it. It's like, wow, this is the best type of university degree I could ever imagine, because I'm getting paid and I'm working on a real life projects and I'm experimenting with all these new techniques that I'm learning about, through different sources. So yeah, I guess my answer is, yeah, patience, resilience, and remember that whilst you're in the business and every other person within your business is telling you to do it the way you've always done it, and just get on with your job and stop trying to rock the boat. There are probably millions of other people like us out there who are, stuck in the same situation, trying to figure it out for ourselves. So it's just a case of, just hold on tight, because it's not going to be easy, but it is possible, right?
I love it. I love it. And you mentioned it already, but tell us more about your email list. What are you working on? What you doing?
Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. Every day I send out a short email which talks about something that I'm either learning about, or just some musings I have on the state of the industry, or my experience of being a learning designer slash performance consultant. It's just a 1 minute read, very short emails, because it takes, I don't have time to write big long emails every day, but I've just passed 100 days of consecutive emails, and it's just kind of a fun thing I started doing. And yeah, it's I actually started doing it because I was struggling to keep up with my consistent posting of YouTube videos, and writing is a lot easier. I can do it on my phone. I've got a newborn baby as well at home, which has interrupted my sleep schedule quite considerably in the last 12 months. So I haven't been as organized as I usually am. So yeah, just being able to send out a daily email has just been something, yeah, fun to do. That's gathering some momentum, which is cool.
So you haven't already done the pre-written emails? You're still writing them daily in real time?
There's about 10 emails when you sign up to the list, which are pre-written. So it's like an onboarding sequence where I've written like 10 emails, just kind of going through just the basics
Yeah.
of my way of thinking and how I'm approaching L&D. And then after that, yeah, pretty much every day. Occasionally, I might write 2 in a day. If I know that I've got a busy day coming up tomorrow, I might do 2 today and then schedule it. But yeah, I'm doing it every day.
That's impressive, man. That's crazy. When
it's
you told
really,
me that last time, I was just like, really?
you know what, Luke? It's really not impressive, and I tell you why. When I first thought about, I'm on a daily email list, a chap called Jonathan Stark who does business coaching. I've been on his daily email list for about 3 years, and he's written an email every day for 3 years. And I was always like, wow, like, God, that guy is a machine. How do you even do that? But then when he explained the concept behind it, it became totally and it became totally like understandable why he could do it. Because if you think about habits, it's very easy to brush your teeth every day, right? But it's really difficult to, I don't know, mow your lawn once a week, or go, I don't know, I'm trying to think of ideas of things that you do maybe weekly or monthly. Habits that you do every day are very easy to implement, I find, anyway, because you do it every day. You either do it or you don't do it, right? So, but a weekly thing, like when I used to blog as well. I'd be blogging weekly. I'd be like, oh God, what am I going to write about this week? I'd suddenly come to, like, the end of the week, Sunday night, I'd be like, what am I going to blog about this week? And I'd be sitting there tapping my head, thinking, what am I going to write? When I'm writing daily, because I'm always writing about stuff, I'm always thinking about stuff. Like, it's always on my mind. So this conversation that we've just had, well, I'm sure by the time I sit down to think about it later, will have sparked 3 or 4 ideas for a new email. And because of the increased volume of content I'm putting out, I get more replies, and those replies spark more ideas. So I actually have a big long list of emails that I haven't written yet, that are just sitting there waiting to be written. So, how many emails do you send a day, Lou?
For work or for what I actually do?
I'm not,
Because I'm sure I do it too. If I'm being honest, I'm sure I do it too. But what I keep thinking about is how I have, and so instead of emails, and I guess this is where it's like my thought process is kind of like going crazy. But I'm sure if I actually sat down and thought about it, like you were saying, it's not impossible to do. But I know that I post statuses daily, basically LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever. But that's how I communicate more. Isn't as much email. It's more about with just being online. But if I took those and if I flipped it into emails, I'm sure it would be the same thing.
Exactly.
My brain is wired being like, email's so different, when I'm like, no, it's not, now that you're saying it. It's really not.
Yeah, I think as soon as you stop thinking about an email newsletter has to be some big convoluted complex thing, or like it has to be a blog post, it's like, no, it's just, sometimes my emails are like 2 sentences and that's it. So and that's, I think, why they're getting some kind of I'm getting some pretty good open rates and getting some pretty good feedback, and I think it's because people are saying, they just sometimes they take a look while they're sitting on the toilet or they're on the train, or 2 minutes done, they move on to the next thing. But that consistency really helps people kind of learn. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
I am one of those people who have opened up all of them. So since I've signed up for the list, I have read them all. I thought they were really cool. And now knowing that you are actually behind the scenes doing these also in real time, that is super cool to me. If people want to sign up for your email list, where do they go to find this and to learn more about everything that you're doing?
Pugh.com, the very obvious email list at the top.
There we go. Simple enough. Well, I'm going to put all the links down below as well to answer. That way they can find you, connect over with you on all the social media sites and everything else under the sun. But once again, Ann, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been absolutely awesome to connect with you and to talk about all of these different things.
Thanks so much, Luke. Really appreciate it.
If you hung in there all the way with us, you are a rock star. I didn't realize how long we were talking for on the podcast until Ant mentioned that 52-minute mark. And I think this one takes the record for our longest podcast episode ever. I'm not really sure. I haven't gone back and looked through all the records yet, but fairly confident saying it's the longest one we have ever done so far. So, hey, thank you for nerding with us today and for sticking all the way through. If you haven't yet already done so, sign up for Ant's email list at antpugh.com. And if you like today's show, give us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening. Be sure to join our Facebook community to nerd out with us about instructional design. And you can sign up for my mailing list as well over at drlukehobson.com. That is all I have for you, my friends. Stay nerdy out there. I'll talk to you next time.